All right, good morning. Take your Bibles, turn to Matthew chapter 6. Saw a news story a couple of years ago about a huge hoard or cache of Anglo-Saxon treasures that were dug up in a farmer's field in England. And as I understand it, they came from 600 to 700 A.D., so it's from a long time ago. And by the time they got everything out of the ground, it was valued at 3.5 million English pounds. I had to do a little calculation. It's about 5 million English dollars. And they found armor, they found swords, decorative items, religious items, and other sorts of things that belonged to some Vikings from a long time ago. And a lot of people were saying this was a huge treasure. And when you hear the word treasure, you may think of something that's worth a lot of money. And the passage we're going to be looking at this morning, Jesus talks about true treasure. So if you look at Matthew chapter 6, and we'll start with verse 19, Jesus is going to remind us and teach us that we need to have a singleness of heart. We need to have a singleness of passion toward true treasure. Notice what he says, verse 19. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in or steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. The eye is the lamp of the body. So when your eye is clear, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. And if then the light that is in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? No one can serve two masters. For either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. And so we're going to look at two characteristics of this singleness of heart that we should have. Number one, a sound investment. Now, when we invest in something, we want to have a good return. And sometimes we'll go to an investment professional, or maybe they'll come to your place of work, and maybe you'll have a plan where you begin to put away for the future and put away for your retirement. And as I look at this passage, it dawns on me there are really only two choices for investments. It really boils down to just two choices. Number one is the bank of the world, as Jesus calls it, earthly treasure. And I'm thinking about all the different ways that people try to protect their investment in this world. Ancient times all the way up to now. People would build bigger storage places to store their wealth and or maybe they'll invest in rare materials. I'm thinking of Samson when he bartered with the Philistines for 30 changes of clothes. And that may not seem like a big deal to us. But if you know anything about the Philistines, they were a very cultured people. So this would have been something like, I don't know if it was silk, but it would have been something very valuable. Some people would actually take their money and deposit it in a temple and put a guard around it, because people typically didn't go around robbing temples unless you're Indiana Jones or somebody like that. Or maybe they would just go bury it in the ground and hide it someplace. And of course, if you do that, you've got to make a map, right? So you remember where you buried it so you can find it again. Part of the problem is no matter where you put your bank, no matter where you put your money, whether it's in the bank or investing it in something, it is never 100% secure, and it's never really safe. You put it into bigger barns, guess what? Barns can catch fire. Barns can attract mice and other items that can destroy your investment. Moths can eat your clothes if you invest in precious materials. Robbers can steal the things that you've hidden away. And you know, there wasn't a whole lot that was safe in ancient times, and even in modern times, I think people have discovered that there's not a whole lot of things that are safe. I remember a few years ago when we lived in Leavenworth, Kansas, we didn't have in a town of 40,000, there wasn't a bakery anywhere in town. And can you imagine that? No place to get a donut. Well, I take that back. You could get donuts at the grocery store, but there was no bakery. And everyone got really excited when down on Main Street somebody opened a bakery. And every morning they baked fresh donuts, and that place was packed. Every morning people went in and bought their donuts, and they had these other pastries I'd never seen before, these fancy ones. And so it was always interesting to try something new. And then one year, downtown, there was a 4-mile creek ran right in the middle of downtown. We never even noticed it until it flooded one year. And the entire Main Street had anywhere from 3 foot to 1 inch of water. And the bakery happened to be at the part where it was at least knee deep. And when the water finally subsided, the business was never the same after that. In fact, they closed up not so long after that, and everybody was so disappointed. We never thought, and we only had the bakery for about a year and a half. We never thought that we would lose it, and it never came back. And sometimes disasters such as that wipes people out in their business, and never think that something like that may happen. It wasn't that long ago when the markets ruined some people's life savings. They've been putting money away for years, and then the market crashed, and some people lost everything that they had put away for retirement. Can you imagine that? Spending years or decades putting money away, and then the next thing you know, it's all gone. I remember when I was working in the Air Force, we shared the runway with General Dynamics, and at the time they were building F-16s across the runway. And there were people that were working over there in the plant. They made really good money and made a pretty good living for themselves. And then I remember one day I heard about a whole bunch of people coming into work one morning, and all their toolboxes were lined up by the entry with pink slips on them. They never saw it coming. I don't know if a contract got canceled or what. And they tried to find another job making the kind of money they did working at General Dynamics, and of course they could not, because that was big money at the time. I mean, there's all kinds of things that can happen that can cause your plans and your dreams for the future to just go bankrupt. And Jesus talks about moth and rust destroying your wealth, but for us, we probably think more in terms of economics. We think of layoffs. We think of recessions and things of that nature. That's the bank of this world. But Jesus is talking about the bank of heaven. Don't store up for yourself treasures on earth. Don't put all of your hopes into the treasures that you can store up on earth. Instead, store up treasure in heaven, because no moth, no rust, no economic downturn, no fire, no bug infestation, none of these things will affect your treasure in heaven. And so we want to invest in the bank of heaven. But how do we do that? Turn with me, if you would, to Luke chapter 12. Luke chapter 12. Go down to verse 15. And notice what Jesus says here. Luke chapter 12, verse 15. He says, "Beware and be on your guard against every form of greed, for not even when one has an abundance does his life consist of his possessions." Underline that last phrase. Even when you have a bunch, your life is not about your possessions. That's not what life is all about. And sometimes it takes a lot of people a long time, or maybe something disastrous to happen before they realize that. And we could spend all of our energy trying to amass wealth, trying to amass fortunes, and even if we don't make it very far, we can still put all of our energy into that. And then what are you left with at the very end? Heard someone once say that, that he's never heard anyone on his deathbed, with all of his family surrounding him, say something to the effect of, "I sure wish I would have," that happens, doesn't it? "I sure wish I would have spent more time at the office." No one ever says that on their deathbed, because things all of a sudden come into perspective. The things that are really important, things like God, things like family, things like love, things like friends. And so Jesus tells a parable to illustrate this. In verse 16 of Luke 12, he tells a parable, and he says, "The land of a rich man was very productive." He had a good year. "And he began reasoning to himself, saying, 'What shall I do, since I have no place to store my crops?' Then he said, 'This is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have many goods laid up for many years to come. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, You fool, this very night your soul is required of you. And now who will own what you have prepared? So is the man who stores up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. You notice how death always cancels ownership of earthly wealth? No matter how much you've done, no matter how much you have put away, death always cancels ownership of earthly wealth. You can't take it with you. What is your life? If you take all of your wealth away, what does your life amount to? The way to have true treasure is not by hoarding it, but the way to have true treasure is to have a giving heart. Go down to verse 33 of Luke chapter 12. Jesus says, Sell your possessions and give to charity. Make yourselves money belts which do not wear out, an unfailing treasure in heaven, where no thief comes near, nor moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The way to build up treasure is to be generous. Sometimes the one thing that stands between us and God is our attachment to worldly things, to earthly things. You remember the rich young ruler when he came to Jesus and he wanted to know, what do I need to do to inherit eternal life? And he's been keeping all of these commands, but Jesus says the one thing that you lack, sell everything that you have, give it to charity, come and follow me. And of course the rich man wasn't willing to do that. He was too attached to his things. 1 Timothy chapter 6. 1 Timothy chapter 6. Listen to these words. Verse 17. Instruct those who are rich in this present world not to be conceited or to fix their hope on the uncertainty of riches. On the uncertainty of riches. But on God, who richly supplies us with all things to enjoy. Instruct them to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share, storing up for themselves the treasure of a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is life indeed, that which is true life. Life is not about our possessions, right? There are things that are much more important than our possessions. And notice, the way that we're rich toward God is to be rich in good works, to be generous, to be ready to share, and then we store up treasure in heaven. The only thing that is of a lasting significance are things like love and service and giving. And the best thing about storing up wealth in heaven is that it is 100% secure. It has better than an A+ rating. I remember reading about a woman in Israel back in 2009 who lost her life savings. She didn't trust banks. I mean, just recently, banks hadn't been doing very well, and so she didn't trust banks or any kind of other financial institution. So she thought what she would do, what was the safest thing in the world with her money. She took all of her money, all of these shekels and all of these dollars, and she stuffed them inside of her mattress and felt very secure because it was close to her. She slept on it. No one knew it was there. She didn't tell a single person where she had taken her life savings. One day, her daughter thought she would do something nice for her mother. You know, there's that old beat-up, lumpy mattress that she sleeps on all the time. I'm going to replace that lumpy mattress. Probably didn't realize that those lumps probably were her life savings inside of the mattress. And so she thought she would surprise her. And so she went out and got rid of the old mattress, replaced it with a brand new, wonderful mattress. And her mom came in and went to bed that night. And I guess it took her to the middle of the night before she realized why she was sleeping so comfortably. She stood up in the middle of the night, sat up and screamed, realizing that the mattress was gone. And the last part of that news story showed the daughter, along with the bulldozer, out in the dump looking for an old beat-up, lumpy mattress. There's no way to safeguard our earthly treasures. The only way to safeguard any kind of treasure is to lay up treasure in heaven. That's the best investment we can make. How do we do that? Whenever we volunteer to help someone in the name of Christ, we're investing in heaven. Whenever we buy groceries for those who are in need, we're investing in heaven. Whenever we help that family with clothing and other needs because their house had caught on fire, we're investing in heaven. Any service, any act of kindness in the name of Christ is something that sticks with us forever in heaven. Anything that we do in the name of Christ, any service. And that brings us to the second point. Not only a sound investment, but number two, a clear vision. Matthew chapter 6, Jesus talks about two kinds of eyes. If your eye is clear, then your body's going to be full of light. What in the world is he talking about? And as I was looking at this text and looking at it in other translations, if your eye is good in one, or if your eye is sound, or if your eye is healthy, or if your eye is unclouded, or like mine says, if your eye is clear, the King James said, if your eye is single. Okay, so that kind of clues me in. Here's a word that's a little bit, or a thought that's a little bit difficult to translate into English by a single word. So I went and looked it up, and the word that's used here means simple, it means single or undivided, it means sincere, or it means straight, depending on how you're using the word. It has the idea often of being something that's unambiguous. It has the idea of singleness of heart. It has the idea of an undivided heart. And I looked at some other passages where it's used. James chapter 1 and verse 5 says that God gives generously without reproach. And that word generously is actually the same word. When He gives us undivided, is fully committed to giving. There's no reservations, no hidden agenda. Or in Colossians chapter 3 where it says to obey those who are over you, not with external service, but with sincerity of heart. That word sincerity, once again, is that same word, an undivided heart. It's fully committed. There's no hidden agenda, but a faithful heart. So the idea here of having a clear, unclouded eye is to have devotion without reservation to God. There's no duplicity here. There's no one thing when somebody's looking at me and another thing when nobody's looking, but it's a fully committed heart to God. So if your eye, Jesus says, is undivided, if it's single, if it's devoted to God without reservation, then He says your body, you will be full of light. You'll be enlightened. And you can judge things and see them as they really are and understand the value of things and what's truly valuable in life and what's not so valuable in life. But He says if you have a bad eye, then your body will be full of darkness. And the word bad here means diseased or evil. But the word evil eye or bad eye in Judaism usually refers to envy or greed. And so if you have an evil eye, then you're full of envy and greed. It's like the parable that Jesus tells in Matthew chapter 20. Where Jesus tells a story about how a guy went out and found some people to work for him in the morning. And he found some workers and they came to work for him. Then in the middle of the day, he goes out and finds some more workers because he needs more workers. Then the last hour of the day, he still goes out and finds more workers. Then at the end of the day, he gives everybody a denarius. And that's the wages for a full day's work. And some of the people that have been working all day said, no, that's not fair. Those people only worked an hour and they got a full day's wages just like us who worked a full days. And the master says, well, wait a minute, isn't it my stuff? Isn't it up to me if I want to be generous? Or is your eye envious because I am generous? It's that same word. Is your eye bad? Is your eye envious? And so if my eye is full of envy, if my eye is full of pride and greed, Jesus says it's going to dim my eyes and cause darkness to creep into my heart. And so if I'm always focused on what more I can get, why is that guy doing better off than me? And if that's my focus, then darkness will creep into my heart. And Jesus said, oh, how great is that darkness if you think that darkness is light. If you think that's the way it ought to be, how great is that darkness. Greed and envy divides and blinds our heart to the things that are good. I want to read from 1 Timothy chapter 6. Listen to these words. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 7. And here's a perspective we should have with a good, undivided eye. We have brought nothing into the world, so we cannot take anything out of it either. If we have food and covering, with these we shall be content. But those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a snare, and many foolish and harmful desires which plunge men into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all sorts of evil, and some, by longing for it, have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. You know, Mark Buchanan wrote a book, Things Unseen, a few years ago. And he writes in it that it seems like there are so many of us that are living for the next thing. And so we're looking forward to the next thing. Maybe it's the next luxury. It's the next job. It's the next adventure. Whatever the next thing is, we're always looking forward to the next thing. And this becomes so obsessive that we lose the capacity to enjoy and to be thankful for what we have right now. And he said, nowhere is this more evident than at Christmas. Think about the way things are at Christmas. Tree over in the corner, and there's a mountain of presents under the tree, and the day finally comes, and what happens? The gifts get handed out, and you tear into that paper. Tear into the paper, and you get excited, and you hear the squeals of excitement. Oh, look what I got! And that lasts for all of, 2 seconds? What's next? And you're looking for the next thing, and then you tear it open. Oh, look what I got! And the interest and the enjoyment lasts for just about a second until you get all the way to the end, and you're sitting in a sea of wrapping paper, and what do you hear? Is that all? There's no more. Is that all? And then the wind just seems to escape from the sail. He says this shows not that we value things too much, but that we value things too little. We forget to treasure the things that we have now. And the pressure of wanting more and more and always looking forward to the next thing can actually dilute our gratitude and enjoyment of the things that God has granted to us now. And then he writes this. He says, God made us this way. He made us to yearn, to always be hungry for something we can't get, to always be missing something we can't find, to always be disappointed with what we receive, to always have an insatiable emptiness that no thing can fill, and an untamable restlessness that no discovery can still. Yearning itself is healthy, a kind of compass inside us pointing to true north. It's not, listen to this, it's not the wanting that corrupts us. What corrupts us is wanting that's misplaced. Do you hear that? The wanting is the corrupts us is the wanting that's misplaced, set on the wrong thing. You know, the Bible uses this word over and over again, talking about our hope. It's something that we look forward to. Our hope is in heaven. Our home is in heaven. And the Bible is forward-looking, and our faith is forward-looking. But our ultimate hope is not anything of this earth. Our ultimate hope is in heaven, and God has guaranteed that to us. And so we don't want to place our hopes on the things of this earth, because those things are passing. We need to place our desire, we need to place the desire of our heart singly on one thing, and that's God. You know, in finances, they tell you to diversify your portfolio, right? Sound financial advice, because the good investments will shield you from the bad investments. So that makes sense when they say don't put all your eggs into one basket. And so that's good financial advice for investments, but it's horrible advice for life. It's horrible advice for eternity. Jesus said you cannot serve two masters. You're going to love one and hate the other. And if you try to serve two masters, it's going to destroy you. You can't invest in the bank of the world and in the bank of heaven. It has to be one or the other. That's why he said if your eye is undivided, if your eye is completely devoted, then you'll be completely full of light. So in our singleness of heart, we put all of our eggs in one basket, the only secure basket. You know, a few years ago, I was in Scottsbluff, Nebraska, and in the Bible class, I remember asking the question, why do you want to go to heaven? Of course, a lot of people answered, as they did then, well, I don't want to go to the other place. Okay, I definitely don't want to go to the other place. But is there any other reason you want to go to heaven other than to stay out of hell? And somebody piped up and said, well, you know what? That's where God is. That's why I want to go to heaven. I love my God. I've been spending my entire life praising Him and worshiping Him and serving Him. And I want to go where God is. That's why I want to go to heaven. Heaven is His throne and the earth is His footstool, and I want to be there with Him. That's my treasure. Jesus says, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. And if I treasure God, then that puts everything else in this world into perspective. This world is passing away. Everything in it is passing away. The one thing that doesn't pass away is everything that we do for God. So the question I should ask myself is, what do I treasure the most? Well, how do I answer that question? I don't know if you ever do a personal inventory, but sometimes it's helpful to get a sheet of paper out, make a column, and write down all of your resources. Time, maybe a column for time, maybe a column for financial resources, your money, maybe a time for my work, and maybe another column for my skill, or whatever it might be. And I go through after making all those columns and ask, okay, how much do I have of each of these? How much time do I have? How much money do I have? And then I take an inventory of all the resources that I have. Then ask myself the question, how and in what way are these things devoted to God? Where I put my emotional energy is going to reveal what I truly value and what I truly treasure in life. What is this all about? You know, God's precious treasure is you. You thought about that? God treasures you. That's why He called Israel my special treasure. And that's why He calls you my special treasure. God gave the very best that He could for you. Because He loves you and He treasures you, and you are precious to Him. And so His heart's desire for you is to love Him back. You realize that's what Jesus says when it comes to the commandments? That's what it all boils down to, is love. We do what we do for God, and we do what we do for other people who have been created in His image because of love. It all boils down to that. And so I'm going to invite you this morning, if you have not accepted Him, if you've not accepted Jesus as Lord of your life, if you've not been baptized, your sins have not been washed away, to make that decision this morning. And if you've already done that, then here's something to think about, okay? Where is my treasure? You know that $5 million treasure found in a field in England? I was thinking about that. At some point, that made somebody rich, didn't it? I don't know who it belonged to, and they're probably not sure who it belonged to either. But one thing's for sure, it doesn't belong to them anymore, does it? That's the way things are of this earth. The only thing we can truly treasure, the only thing we can truly count on is God. So we're going to go ahead and sing a song this morning, and if you need to respond to the invitation, I invite you to come to the front as we stand and sing.